Hi there, it's Ian here, and you're watching Grumpy Opinions, the show where I'm going to tell you all about what I think of films, TV shows, games, and life in general. Let's get on with the show. Please excuse me if I'm a little bit gruff this week, folks, but there's a bit of the flu going around in Scotland, and I caught it, so there we go. Anyway, Outlander is a historical sci-fi fantasy romance drama from Starz Entertainment, where 1940s nurse Claire and 1740s Highlander Jamie are footing around in France, and they're in a terrible pickle. Episode 7, Faith, begins unexpectedly with a wee girl reading a bird book in the 1950s in a library. In shock horror, the wee ginger snaggletooth monster with a Yank accent is actually Claire's daughter, and she points at a heron, and that makes Claire remember something. Cutting back to the hospital in 1740s Paris, and Claire's in the midst of a procedure as a result of the baby badness that happened at the end of last week's episode, and the matron nurse lady coos and placates her, while the surgeon general executor witch smeller pursuivant bloke is getting all sorts of tongs and rags in her lower regions, and he doesn't look happy about it, not at all. And she wakes up later to find out that, yeah, as expected, the wee baby didn't survive, and naturally Claire doesn't take it well, and there's much symbolism as she knocks over a Virgin Mary idol. But once she's calmed down later on, she's told that the baby was a girl, and the baby was secretly baptised and buried in hallowed ground in the churchyard, but that her own troubles aren't over, because she's feverish and in a bad way. And during the night, she gets visited by a scary monk, who turns out is Master Raymond in disguise, and he does some sort of hand-wavy massage woo on her, which makes her blood poisoning all go away, and then he yanks out the bad bit of her undercarriage, and instantly she's feeling better again, and it must be on account of the blue aura that he says that they both have, or something like that. Yeah, really, it goes that way. So anyway, a week or two later, she finally feels better and heads home with wee Fergus. And after kicking the spoons under the bed in a mood, she storms out of the room and overhears wee Fergus in the midst of a nightmare. And she wakes him up, and he admits that he thinks it's all his fault because while he was nicking stuff for her, it turns out the perfume that he grabbed was for her, and it was the lavender oil that Randall really likes. But he was pilfering that, and then he tells her that because he was doing that, he gets assaulted by Randall, and then saved by Jamie, who was then called for the jewel to be back on again, and that's why Jamie went and had the jewel. Now, we all kind of figured that out. But finding this out actually gets through to Claire what's going on, and she suddenly gets out of her big postnatal fug and storms off to see the top nun to get a favour, because the nun is vaguely related to the king, and that gets her an inn at the palace. But the nun warns that King Louis may want a bit of nookie in return, but Claire says she'll put up with that, and of course, on arrival, the royal dude is all smiles and coffee and oranges, and then he does a bit of ring smooching, and then leads her off through a secret door, asking for her help because he knows that she is La Dame Blanche. Then we arrive at some sort of secret chamber where Louis wants her to help him root out evil dark art practitioners. Yeah, it sounds like it's gone a bit Harry Potter. And then there's the witch smeller pursuivant there as well, and Claire realises that life is very much on the line here and it could well be hers that gets the chop. But then two men are brought in, and lo and behold, it's only Saint Germain and Master Raymond, and the king asks her to help figure out which one is the badness, or is it both of them. So she does a little bit of theatrics, talking about seeing evil shadows behind the Comte's eyes, and he admits that he tried to poison her. But Claire decides to be nice and tries to minimise her involvement in the damage this could cause, because even though he's a total shitbag, she isn't. But the king's having absolutely none of it, and is just about to pull out a weird looking snake off the opening titles, and then let God decide all of it by seeing who it bites, when she suggests another idea, a poison test. So he agrees, and she goes off and makes the same cupful of the poison, the fake poison that Master Raymond was selling to people early in the season that makes people feel ill, doesn't kill them. And she gives it to Raymond, and he winces and falls over and then gets back up and seems not too bad. And just as she's about to pass it to the Comte, her magic poison identifying necklace turns black, and they all know that it's actual poison because quite clearly Raymond has slipped something bad in there after he had a sip. And Saint Germain knows it as well, but he at least has the dignity to die with a quick insult and then keel over all nice and cinematically. And after that, Raymond is let away and there's just time for a quickie with the prince before she nabs an orange and goes home. You know, women usually don't get pregnant straight after pregnancy, so I mean, she should be okay, hopefully anyway. And now that Jamie's been released on a pardon that's apparently valid in both France and Scotland, kind of convenient, and he finds brooding Claire in the parlour, and they have a fairly difficult exchange about the dead bairn, and Claire tells him all about the baby and how Claire blamed him, and now blames herself, and the pair of them realise they've both been pretty unrealistic and unfair to each other, and they decide to go home to Scotland. Just before they do that, they pay their respects at the baby's grave, and they leave a nice Scottish spoon there from Jamie's collection, or at least, you know, till the next beggar comes along and walks off with it. So what did I think? Well, this was very much an episode of two halves. I mean, there's the tragic stuff about the miscarriage and the resultant effect on the main couple, but there's also the woo and mysticism stuff in Versailles and the tying up of Raymond and Germaine storylines. Now, first off, I'll say this week in acting terms, Katrina Balfe has really earned the Emmy that no doubt she'll get nominated for at the end of the season. I mean, she really managed to carry the shock and pain and horror of a miscarriage, as well as the listlessness and the bitterness towards Jamie. I mean, it was a subtle but great performance and really beautifully well done. And the other thing I liked was the fact that it wasn't rushed in any way, letting the full effect of all this settle in over several scenes during the beginning of the episode in the hospital. And in story terms, I also love the fact that the show is further confusing us with the future stuff, because now we've seen that she actually has a ginger baby girl, and she had a ginger baby girl that died, and she's going to be pregnant again at some point. So at what point is she going to get pregnant with a wee ginger baby in the future that grows up to be the girl we saw at the beginning in Boston? Now, I mean, it's not at all clear when she's going to return to the future. I mean, I guess that it's going to be the end of the season because that's kind of how TV usually works. But for all we know, that might not be for 3 seasons. I mean, they're talking about returning to Scotland, so I presume it'll happen soon, but maybe not immediately. I mean, they'll probably go back next week being episode 8, which is halfway through the 16-episode run. I mean, it would make sense for them to head back at that point in the story, like half season in France, half in Scotland. I've also got to say it was nice to see the guy playing the Comte getting a good death scene. I mean, the man can clearly act, and he's not really been given that much to do all season other than sneer and look sexy or annoyed. I mean, he really gave it his all in that last scene, and I thought it was a really shame when he copped it because I kind of wanted the character to stick around a bit more. It was also really nicely handled with all the dead baby stuff, because that's a really difficult thing to do, because you do it too much one way and it might come off as flippant, too much the other and it comes off as maudlin and saccharine. But I think they really nailed it right on the level. I mean, it was very sad, very touching, especially this flashback near the end when she was cradling the dead baby's body. I mean, and then her friend Louise having to come and gently take it away from her, allowing for Claire's grief to really break. I mean, that was really beautifully done. But as always, I've got some grumps about this episode. And since I was just talking about the baby stuff, I'll get the wee niggles with that way out the way first. Now, I mean, this is not with the storyline or the way it was handled. As I said, that was really good. And it wasn't even at the dead baby prop, because that was really good. I mean, this wasn't like American Sniper, where they have like a fake plastic baby dummy that looked really crap and there's a controversy. But rather that in having such an emotional impact in the episode at that point, and to do with that storyline, it's kind of almost like the writers and the director had blown a lot of their creative emotional load over that bit, and as a result, the rest seemed kind of vapid in comparison. I mean, I suspect there's also a little bit of the old, oh, quick, everyone's really sad about the baby storyline. Let's get all of the daft stuff out while everyone's too wrecked to be critical about it. Now, I mean, what do I mean by that? Well, put it this way, the Fergus scene was a letdown. Now, it just was, sorry. We knew that was going to be coming after last week. If you had any sort of idea of things that were going on and the way it was done, it was so powerfully implied that something horrible was going to happen to Fergus at the hands of Jack Randall in that room. And to be honest, the flashbacks added nothing. In fact, for me, they actually lessened it a little bit. I mean, I'm not saying there was anything wrong with the way that it was acted, but I think the implication of it was almost as just good enough to be done by itself. Although it may have been because the lad playing Fergus, who's been really great in other scenes, I don't think he carried that scene well enough. I mean, it could be because he's a French actor and he wasn't doing it in his first language, and it might have been a lot more powerful if he'd actually let him do it in French, because Claire's character speaks French. Maybe he would have emoted better, but that's my guess as to why they did all the flashbacks, because otherwise they could have had an amazing scene of him just talking, and then it would have been much more powerful. I mean, you only have to look at episode 16 of season 1 to see that they can do this better on this show. And there's a horrible, cynical part of me that actually feels that a wee thief boy raised in a brothel might have actually had to do that sort of thing before. And it's a bit nasty and a shame, but it is the 1740s, and I'm trying to be a realist about this. But anyway, it wasn't a terrible scene. I just felt that it could have been so much more powerful. But also coming straight off the back of the whole dead baby stuff, it just didn't really have that emotional punch. And I felt also it was a little bit rushed and not acted quite as well as it could have been by the little boy. I mean, bless him, he's only a little boy. Anyway, the real issue I had with the episode, which you've probably guessed, is all the mystic woo. Now, one of the things I loved in Outlander's first season was the fact that it was a no-nonsense nurse who went back in time with medical knowledge and early 20th century science know-how, dealing with 1700s kind of mindset about God and witchcraft and all that kind of wibbly-wobbly hoodoo nonsense. Now, here we are in season 2, and suddenly we've got auras, magic necklaces, people who can make bacteria explode inside your blood using magic massage hand waving and that sort of guff. Now, I know in the book Claire met the bloody Loch Ness monster in the first one, and stuff like that pervades a little bit. But the whole point of season 1 was really that magic isn't real, witches aren't real, science makes sense. And here in season 2, And sure, a lot of Mr. Raymond's stuff has been like prestidigitation. I mean, that's sleight of hand to the uninitiated, or like herbology know-how. This week it was all out the window, and it was him prattling on about auras and both of them being blue and good, and him using hand wavy magic. Now, had he only put his hand up her skirt and yanked the bad bit out that was making her ill, I'd have been fine with it. But the voiceover about Claire feeling the bacteria dying, and I don't know how he did that was too much for me. I mean, I just thought that was silly. And then reinforcing it with the changing necklace thing at the end, I mean, that was just daft. I mean, I said the other week, that's complete nonsense. Look it up on the internet. No such thing exists. And even if you managed to make something that did react to poison, it would only react to like one kind of poison anyway, so it's pretty useless. But I mean, it's a TV show, so whatever. The other thing about the trial scene was that it all seemed a bit cheap for Claire to go all, I'm going to get you, talking to like the Comte and saying about shadows behind his eyes, and then having a bit wibbly wobbly and turning around and deciding that actually I don't really want him to die or anything because I'm not a bad person. I mean, one thing or the other, Claire. And then Raymond poisoning him, only for Claire to then immediately turn around and look at him and go, I'll miss you the most, cowardly lion, because yes, Claire, I do know the film. But nothing in the show had really built up the idea as well that the Comte would actually be accused of any sort of witchcraft. I mean, where did that come from? That came across as something that was cut from the book, and it just seemed a little bit off to me. And one other final little thing about the Comte's death. Did anyone else think that this looked almost exactly the same as Lestat's death scene on Interview with the Vampire? I mean, it was shot almost exactly the same. Maybe it's the similar clothes and look and things in old, 17th century France. But that really struck a chord with me. I was sitting there going, I've seen this before somewhere. Anyway, on another side note, when Claire was poisoned with that stuff, wasn't she ill and in bed for like a day? Raymond gets over it in about 10 seconds, just enough for him to pop a nasty in the wine. And then, why didn't she make 2 cups of it? I mean, cinematically, usually in things like that, people will be given 2 cups and they'll drink them at the same time. I mean, obviously it's suited for her to give it to him first, but what if she'd given it to the Comte first? I mean, it would have been completely different. He would still be alive, and he might have actually owed her a debt or something. Could have been really interesting that way, just saying. But the thing is, overall, I'm not really actually that cross with this. It's just that one real scene and the magic woo that annoyed me. And I imagine that's mainly because it follows on from the book and that daft woo and mysticism stuff, what must have been there in the original novel. But anyway, I don't mind. They're back off to Bonnie, Scotland soon. So until then, I've been Ian, and these have been my grumpy opinions.